Intramuros is important because it is one destination, no, tourist destination in the city of Manila. And of course, this is a historical city. It is a city within a city because the schools are here, churches are here, institution, agencies, of course, the big churches here who always support the IA, and of course the training center who are here, the hospitals are within the city of Intramuros. My wish for Intramuros is orderly, clean city, and people should be in their perspective places. Like for instance, if hopefully in a couple of months or 3 months from now, the ISF will be relocated to resettlement site in Cavite or in Bulacan, because we want them to be in the respective homes. And of course, with that, Intramuros will rise again with this movement of informal settlers. We are not removing them from here because they are part of the community. They work here, they can come, they can live here, but they have to go to their respective permanent homes after resettlement. And of course, I wish also that Intramuros will be fully developed in terms of vacant lot, property. The owners will have this plan to develop their property here in Intramuros so that there will be no blighted areas anymore around. My name is Marieta V. Aliaga. I started working here in Intramuros in 1983, and this will be my 35th year in Intramuros administration. As Chief of the Urban Planning, I am responsible for the monitoring of construction in and around Intramuros. We are also in charge of the processing of the Intramuros Development Clearance. Intramuros should be cherished, should be loved, and should be taken care of, because Intramuros is historical. We are part of the history of the Philippines.
Ang Intramuros sa akin ay mahalaga. Ito ay naniniwala ako, ito lang ang Old Manila na siya ay nagpalago ng Metro Manila. Ito yung prime mover ng urbanization din ng Metro Manila. Kung wala Intramuros, wala yung Metro Manila. Kasi dito nagsimula yung malalaking eskwelahan, malalaking building, lahat ng opisina ng gobyerno. Ito lang ang lugar na may walled city o Ciudad Morada na tinatawag. Kaya nandito yung mahalagang building, tao, saka dito lumago. Pero noong 1920 hanggang 1930, lumalabas na rin hanggang 1900, lumalabas na yung mayamang pamilya para magtayo ng malalaking bilya kasi masikip na rin Intramuros, mainit. Kailangan mag-expand, mga eskwelahan, lumabas sa Intramuros. Tulad na ng UST, lumabas siya noong 1927. Tapos yung mga iba pa, Ateneo de Manila, nasunog siya noong 1932. Tapos lumabas din siya. Sana magpatuloy, tuloy-tuloy na maayos sa Intramuros. Pagdating ng present generation, maayos na Intramuros na wala nang masyadong problema. Kasi sa ngayon may mga kagibat pa rin problema. Nandiyan pa rin mga ibang informal settler na may na-relocate na kami, yung mga istansa. Siguro dadami pa ang turista sa atin kasi mabubuksan natin yung sa gitna. Tapos yung mga pavement ayos. Tapos yung mga travel ng tao, foreigner, mapapabilis kasi marami nagpapaliwanag. Sa ngayon dumadami na, may bum bike na, may e-trike, may kalesa na. Marami na nag-aano sa Intramuros kasi ngayon, nagiging na to, parang tuwing may Manila tour, laging Intramuros ang priority ng Department of Tourism, Heritage. Ako nga pala si Mr. Reynaldo Cadiz, nagtatrabaho sa Intramuros ng almost 40 years, from 1979 hanggang ngayon. Naging restoration inspector din ako sa Intramuros kasi lahat ng mga ginagawang restoration, dinaanan ko from stone cutting, tapos pagbubuhos, proper document. Bago siya gawin, babaklasin muna namin yung mga lumang bato, tapos papalitan namin, mga may crack na, papalitan namin ng bago. Minsan, nung early part ng documentation namin, naglalagay din kami ng mga number sa bato para maibalik namin yung structure sa dating ayos. Napaka-importante in Intramuros kasi ito yung natin eh. So, sa buhay ko napakahalaga to kasi dahil sa Intramuros nandito ako nagtrabaho 40 years, naging tanungan ako ng mga pangyayari dito na bagamat hindi ko inaabot iba, yung mga archaeology, tunnel na nahukay, mga artifacts. Tinatanong ako, mga nahukay ng mass grave, halos lahat building na nirestore, kung ano ba yung mga dating opisina dito ng pre-war. Kasi nagbasa din ako ng mga libro na about sa archives namin. Kasi mga old photo, napakahusay ko mag-identify kasi kabisado ko yung old photo and then in new, yung pagkakaiba.
During the Marcos administration, Mrs. Marcos had been interested in the restoration of Intramuros. She led the restoration of some of the gates of Intramuros. Mrs. Marcos got the engineering divisions of the different services of the military. There were lots of objections. I'd called the attention of President Marcos. He asked me to draft a charter for Intramuros, which is what I did, and that is the Intramuros Administration Charter. The greatest satisfaction I had was the presence of a good team headed by Mrs. Esperanza Gatmonton, and in the early days also Felix Imperial, because basically the three of us were the ones who set the initial directions of the Intramuros administration. It's important because it's part of our history, part of our heritage, one of the few physical evidences remaining of the Spanish period of Philippine history. The major development since that time was the proliferation of informal settlers. And it seems to me that the proper and humanitarian relocation of those informal settlers is critical to the future progress of Intramuros. I'm Jaime Laya, and I think the directions of the development of Intramuros embodied in the administration charter continue to be relevant.
Well, Intramuros for me is many things because my father used to work in the port area, in Bonifacio Drive in port area. So even as a small boy, I really knew Intramuros already back in the 50s. And I was very happy to have been appointed administrator in 1989. And that really involved me more with the history of Intramuros and the plans for its further development. It would be very important that we know where we came from, and I think that's the special value of Intramuros. But even in modern times, there could be or there should be, and as it's happening now, other developments here in Intramuros. I'm Jose Capistrano Jr., formerly administrator of Intramuros. Well, as what's happening now, Escuela Taller assists in the restoration of heritage structures through our training of out-of-school youth in the various arts and crafts of heritage restoration. And I think this is important to preserve our historical and heritage structures, and at the same time also reach out to other parts of the country for the same purpose.
If you're looking at Intramuros from the perspective of history, it's one place where you could actually see the history of the Philippines as it unfolded. I see that Intramuros is an area which can embody the concept of reuse in urban planning. So just think of old structures being utilized in a modern sense. I think the challenge for us in IA is how can we recreate the former ambience so that people can relive history through Intramuros. And then that's where it becomes a site where we can educate people on the version of history according to the Filipinos. So I am Roberto Alabaro III, and currently I'm the Assistant Secretary for Tourism Development Planning. And it's fantastic to have an urban area, an old urban area, wherein maybe in our generation we can see this transformed into a more developed society where poverty will no longer exist within the walls of Intramuros.
Intramuros for me is, I would say, the soul of our country. My name is Paulo Mercado. I'm the founder and president of the Creative Economy Council of the Philippines. This is an advocacy group that we set up about 2 years ago to promote the creative industries, both in the public and private sector. So, yung concept of creative economy essentially is taking a look at the contribution of the totality of creative industries and creative individuals to the national economy. So, and our thrust is to get the government to recognize it as a priority strategic sector and support it with, let's say, incentives or from the private sector investments that would make it grow faster. So I wish for Intramuros in the near future to become the country's most iconic creative hub.
Ang ano ko po sa Intramuros isang saysayang lugar. Kasi dito nagkaroon ng digmaan. Yun din yung natutunan ko sa eskwelahan. Sa akin sir, ang laki po ng naitulong ng eskwela talyer kasi nung una po na hindi pa ako nakapasok dito, high school graduate lang ako, nahirapan ako maghanap ng trabaho. So nung nakita ko na mag-opening sila na kailangan nila ng trainees, so pumasok ako yun. Tapos pagka-graduate ko, binigyan nila ako ng opportunity na magtrabaho sa mga heritage site. Ako po si Christian Edward Aguirre. Bali, instructor po ako ngayon ng masonry workshop dito sa Eskwela Talyer. Ang laki ng tulong, unang-una doon sa paninirahan. Mayroon kaming matitirahan sa loob. Dito ako nakatira. Sana po mas tumibay pa ang komunidad dito sa lugar.
Tira ako sa Basco Street, Intramuros, Manila. Doon ako nagkaroon ng isip. Dito ako nakita, dito ako lumaki. Ginagawa ko dito sa Eskwela Talyer o sa trabaho ko. Isa ako sa mga heritage protector, isa akong mason. Kita ko yung Eskwela Talyer na nagtitrain sila ng mga out of school dito. May kahit na high school graduate lang. pinasok ko. Tinitrain nila hanggang sa mahasa. As kinukuha din nila as worker din. Ako si Edsel Paul Mauhay, tumutulong para maibalik yung ganda ng Intramuros. Para mas may baganda Intramuros para sa lahat.
Sa akin, special yung Intramuros dahil sa punong-puno ng historical yung Intramuros. Napamahal na rin po ako dito sa Intramuros dahil dito po ako nagtatrabaho. Ako po si Christian Roa. Ako po isang security guard ng Intramuros bilang isang katipunero po. Naitutulong ko po dito sa Intramuros na mapanatili po yung mga kalinisan, kaayusan, at matiwasay na pagpapatupad. Ni-expect ko po dito sa Intramuros dahil po sa lalong tumatagal, gumaganda siya at dumarami yung mga turista na bumibisita dito.
Welcome. Welcome everybody to the 26th episode of the Intramuros Learning Sessions. I am Rancho Arcilia and I am your host for today. And our topic for today is about the Santo Domingo Church in Intramuros and Lanaval de Manila. So before we start, let me read first some house rules for this webinar. If you would like to ask questions, feel free to do so. If you are joining us via Zoom, send your questions in the Q&A button, which is found in the lower portion of the screen. If you're viewing via Facebook, you may send your questions in the comment section. Only those who have successfully registered and viewed on Zoom will be eligible to get a certificate. A feedback form will be emailed to you after the session, and the certificate will be sent within a week. Note that this webinar is recorded, and ensure that your audio is okay. Wear your reliable set of headphones, and most importantly, get yourself comfortable and enjoy. Now, I'd like to call on the Administrator of Intramuros, Attorney Guillermo Arcido, who will introduce for us today our speaker. Attorney?
Good afternoon, everyone, and we welcome you again to this afternoon or this holiday weekend episode of the Intramuros Learning Session. Today, we'll be speaking about historic place in Intramuros, which is not anymore present, but in another place. Intramuros, for more than 300 years, was the center of faith in the Philippines. So, for this afternoon, we'll be discussing the Santo Domingo Church in Intramuros, historic Intramuros. And we will be having as our guest today, Professor Romeo Galang. Professor Galang is a historian. He has an MA in art history from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, where he's also currently finishing his PhD. Professor Galang also teaches history at the Far Eastern University, and he is also the published author of the Cultural History of Santo Domingo, and has contributed many papers in prestigious scientific journals locally and abroad. So we hope that this afternoon will be a fulfilling one and an enlightening discussion despite the rain, and we hope you enjoy this afternoon session with Professor Romeo Galang. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney. I'd like to call on our speaker, Mr. Galang.
Okay, good afternoon to all of you. First, I would like to thank Attorney Guillermo Arcido for that introduction. So, I'm Romeo Galang Jr. I will be your speaker for this afternoon in the Intramuros learning session. My topic today will be on Santo Domingo Church and Lanaval in its old place in Intramuros, Manila. So let's wait for the slides.
Okay, sir. Sir, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Sir, the PowerPoint is on na po.
Okay, so next slide, please. So when the Dominicans arrived in 1587, they carried with them a small wooden image of Our Lady of the Rosary. So in this picture, we can see the upper part of this image. So this image was enshrined by the Dominican fathers in the main altarpiece of the church when they finished construction of the church near the right bank of the Pasig River. So when the Dominicans arrived, all of the most suitable sites for construction in Intramuros had already been taken. So what was left to them was a marshy patch at the right bank of the Pasig River. In fact, when Bishop Domingo de Salazar blessed the site of the future church and convent, he had to ride the banca. And the first church was made of wood, bamboo, and nipa. Because of the marshy condition, it did not take long for the structure to collapse. And the Dominicans were bent on rebuilding the church. And the next church was finished in 1592. This time it was made of stone. Um, Several benefactors of the order, as well as devotees of Our Lady of the Rosary, contributed for the construction of this church. However, in 1599, an earthquake struck Manila, and one of the buildings that were damaged was the Church of Our Lady of the Rosary of Santo Domingo. So parts of the nave collapsed, and it brought with it the woodworks of the nave. And we know that this church was subsequently uh, repaired, because when the Great Fire of 1603 struck Manila, one of the one of the structures that was greatly affected was the church and convent of Santo Domingo. Because of this fire, they had to transfer the image of Our Lady of the Rosary to the Jesuit church at the other side of the city, which uh, which was left unscathed. Next slide, please. So here we have, because I just enlarged this from, this is a detail from a big picture. This gives us an idea of how the wooden image looked like before. Next slide, please. In 1593, the Governor-General of the Philippines, Luis Perez Dasmariñas, commissioned a Sangley artist to carve an ivory image of Our Lady of the Rosary. So this particular image was under the supervision of Hernando de los Rios Coronel, a very pious person who thereafter entered the priesthood. So upon completion of the image, it was presented to the Dominican fathers by the governor, and the fathers in turn enshrined the image at the main altar of the church. The wooden image, however, was kept, but the citizens of Manila petitioned the Dominican fathers so that the image would be displayed in a place that would be prominent. This should be a place that where it could be seen by the inhabitants of Manila whenever they would like. So the Dominican fathers selected the niche at the top of the structure for this. So whenever you see pictures of Santo Domingo, you will see a top niche wherein this wooden image was enshrined. So at night, candles were lit in order to illuminate the image. That's why this image, the wooden image of Our Lady of the Rosary, was also known in Manila as Nuestra Señora de la Luz, or Our Lady of the Light, because of this light that constantly burned before her image. Next slide, please. The image of Our Lady of the Rosary became renowned in 1645 because of the hostilities between the Dutch and Spanish fleets. So in 1645, a total of 15 Dutch ships uh, engaged the two Spanish galleons in a series of battles. So not all 15 vessels engaged the Spanish galleons, but these battles occurred in at least 5 times. And all throughout these battles, the Spanish ships emerged victorious. In this incident was investigated by the chapter of the Manila Cathedral, and they concurred that this event was uh, was made possible because of the intercession of Our Lady of the Rosary. So for this, um, it was it was concurred that the event be celebrated annually, and the event would be called the Lanaval. So from that time on, the ivory image was known as Lanaval de Manila in honor of the battles that saved Manila from being conquered by a foreign power. So here we see um, a particular painting that was painted in the 19th century, and this one replaced an older painting. This was formerly inside the Lady Chapel in Intramuros until it was destroyed in the bombings. Next slide, please. Um After the 1603 fire, the Dominican fathers rebuilt the church. So the subsequent church was finished in 1610, and it was inaugurated with much festivities. So 1610 was a momentous event. A lot of people joined the Lanaval for that day. Dancers from native dancers from as far as San Miguel uh, went to Manila to celebrate the event. So this is the time when we read passages regarding the black slaves that played in the Lanaval processions. In addition to the ivory image, Governor Luis Perez Dasmariñas also bestowed to the confraternity of Our Lady of the Rosary um, black slave musical performers. So these black slaves played during the mass that honors Our Lady. Uh, Unfortunately, the 1610 structure was also badly damaged by the 1645 earthquake. It was rebuilt by patching up the damages wrought by the earthquake. But we also read accounts that uh, the structure failed to survive subsequent earthquakes of the 1658 and another, the one of San Nicolas that led to the collapse of the remaining parts of the structure. Um, the next church, we have few details regarding its construction, but we know that it was finished because we have an aquarelle of the church. This particular watercolor shows the facade of the church during that time. This was in early 19th century. Early 19th century. We can see that two towers. We know that these two towers rise behind another facade that may have been constructed sometime after the former facade was built. Because if we look at uh, other illustrations of the church, particularly the ones that shows the latter portion, we will find that there is a projecting structure in front of the two towers. Next slide, please. Here we see a view of Santo Domingo Church, most likely from the area of San Gabriel, Hospital de San Gabriel or Santa Cruz. So we can see here uh, the quite low structure that we now know as Santo Domingo Church. We see the two towers. We have the quadrilateral dome along the transept, and from the transept, the extension leads to the Lady Chapel. So the Lady Chapel is the quadrilateral dome that is capped by a lantern. So this chapel uh, was as a result of the Consejo of the Dominicans. They were arguing that in most Dominican churches in Mexico, a separate Lady Chapel was allotted for the Virgin. However, in Manila at that time, the Lady Altar was just one of the collateral altars. So there were two collateral altars at that time. The gospel side or the left side was for the Holy Cross, and the right side was for Our Lady of the Rosary. But because the council agreed to build the chapel, uh, a structure that serves as a small uh, chapel was allotted to the Virgin, and at the end of the chapel is the retablo of the Virgin. So next slide, please. Here we have another picture, another illustration from that time. So this is a watercolor by Jose Honorato Lozano. The one denominated by number 2 was the dome of the Manila Cathedral. In fact, this picture is supposed to be older than the previous one because we can see here the very rough tower of the cathedral. But in this particular watercolor, we can see the front that projects beyond the towers of Santo Domingo. And you have here the quadrilateral dome or the lantern, but we do not have yet the cupola for the Lady Chapel. So next slide, please. There were also modifications done inside Santo Domingo Church at this time. In particular, in 1854, the entire Lady Chapel was renovated, and a new retablo was carved for the Virgin. Here we can see the retablo that had a hemispherical dome or cupola, and this was placed beneath the structure, the Lady Chapel, which is most likely hemispherical dome. We can see portions of the pediments that have medallions of the Dominican saints. So, and here the Our Lady of the Rosary or the Lanaval de Manila was enshrined. Next slide, please. In 1861, another council adopted the modification of the facade of the church. In this proposed facade, they agreed to raise the towers by another level. So here you have the tower that was much higher than the previous one. And this particular facade, the towers in particular were capped by bell-shaped cupolas. If you look at pictures of St. Paul's Cathedral by Sir Christopher Wren in London, you will note the similarities between the facade of these two structures. So it might have been inspired by this cathedral. Unfortunately, next slide. Barely 2 years after its construction, the 1863 earthquake struck. So the Western Tower collapsed during that earthquake, and we know that the nave was likewise damaged. In this particular picture, we can see the rubbles along the road that leads to the wall. So as a result, they had to clear the rubbles of the structure, and um, just just a few days after the earthquake, one of the most famous architects of Manila presented a plan for the reconstruction of the church. Next slide, please. So the architect was Felix Rojas. His plan uh, used the Gothic style. Um, it take quite a while for this structure to be built. One of the reasons was that this particular church was the facade for this particular church was approved in several stages. The first to be approved was this facade. Later, the one that faces UST was later approved, but the one along the inner cloisters uh, was taking time to be approved. And another reason was at that time the city of Manila was contemplating of transferring the religious corporations, as the orders were called, outside the confines of the walls. So, however, the project did not push through, so the Santo Domingo was rebuilt on the site. For this particular project, uh, Felix Rojas designed a, a quite low structure for a Gothic church. If you compare this structure with the Gothic churches of Europe, this one is shorter and wider in contrast to the soaring ones in Europe. Uh, this was the neo-Gothic style, which entails that other materials besides stones can be used. So, to solve the problem uh, of sturdiness, especially of weight, Felix Rojas proposed that brick be alternated with stone. It was argued that a totally brick structure, while light enough to stand earthquakes, would suffer continuous cracks once they appear. So, the presence of interlacing stones within the brick would somehow halt the the cracks that might appear. So here we can also see that uh, pinnacles crowned each of the towers. These pinnacles, however, were made of malave. Later on, you will see pictures of Santo Domingo without those pinnacles because of twin events. One was the 1880 earthquake, which damaged again the Western Tower, but this was followed. This was subsequently repaired, but an 18 an very strong typhoon hit Manila during that time, and in order to save the structure to make it lighter, it was proposed that all the remaining pinnacles, those that were made of wood, as well as the turrets, be dismantled. So that is how we see succeeding pictures of the church. Again, we can see at the top of the pediment a niche enclosed by glass that enshrines the first image of Our Lady of the Rosary, the wooden image carried by the Dominicans in 1587. If you look closely at the doors, the designs are different. So this one employs uh, this structure employs a Gothic style that is very uniform throughout the structure. Next slide, please. Here we have an early American picture. It shows the Church of Santo Domingo as it looms above the walls of Intramuros de Manila. So this was taken somewhere at the edge of Luneta. When it was constructed in 1867, it evolved from being one of the smallest churches in Intramuros to being the second largest one. In fact, it was only the cathedral is bigger than this church. In this particular picture, we also see San Agustin, whose tower rises at the left side. Next slide. So from the main portal of UST, we can get the main portal of UST gives us a clear view of the Western Tower. Next slide. So we have this public space along the lateral side of Santo Domingo Church. So this public space was formerly the burial grounds for UST personnel. Uh, because of the prohibition in urban burials, this space was converted into a garden. It became a city property when the Dominicans exchanged this lot for the portion of road that cuts across that cuts between UST and Ayuntamiento. As we know, Manila has a grid pattern. Parang kalamay siya. So, hating kalamay. And even Ayuntamiento and UST used to be divided by a street that cuts between them. However, that street was allocated by UST when the city government of Manila exchanged this particular open space for that portion of the street. So the street had its dead end here, the buildings of UST. And furthermore, the Dominicans asked that a monument to Miguel Benavides, the first Archbishop of Manila, be erected. Benavides was also a Dominican. And in this particular view, this street leads directly to the lateral portal of Santo Domingo. If you check the uppermost parts of the walls of Santo Domingo Church, you will notice that they terminate in battlements. So it looks like a miniature of the Intramuros walls. So this gives this facade of the church a somewhat military character. And these embattlements are interspersed between the pinnacles of the walls. We also have a view here of the lantern or the quadrilateral tower of Santo Domingo. Next slide, please. So, Santo Domingo hosts several ceremonies for UST. Uh, so here we have one of the functions that uh, that were that were being celebrated in Santo Domingo, and this particular function, uh, we can see in this particular function the uh, students personnel from UST as they march towards the front of the cathedral where the central portal is located. Next slide, please. The back part of Santo Domingo is bounded by another public space. At one time, this public space was known as the Plaza De Los Martires, in honor of the Spanish martyrs. And this part serves as a vantage point for the semicircular apse of the church. However, the trees obscure the view of this semicircular apse. But here we have a great view of the sacristy, whose walls we see here, as well as the adjoining chapel of Our Lady of the Rosary, uh, which was capped by a smaller quadrilateral dome, a smaller rectangular uh, quadrilateral tower that is capped by a quadrilateral dome. Next slide, please. Here we have a clearer view of the semicircular apse as well as the walls of the sacristy. So, um, although there were variations, we have pointed arch windows with tracery along the lower portion, while at the upper portion we have the ox eye windows, or uh, but or the circular windows at the top. So these are also Gothic elements that were employed. Plus the crowning pinnacles along the top walls of the church. Next slide, please. Here we have this is the place where the Americans breached the walls to provide passageway as entrance to the walled city. To the right is the Intendencia building. Behind the tree is the is UST. We have another view of the apse as well as the sacristy walls. But here in this picture, we have another structure, the three-story structure that resembles an oversized bahay na bato. To the left is the Dominican Convent. So the upper part serves as the dormitory of the Dominican Fathers. Next slide, please. As you can see, this portion of the convent rises above the city walls. So this is the most refreshing area in the convent because breeze from the river whips through the rooms of the Dominican Fathers. And this view, this particular photograph also gives us the upper portions of the structures of the church. Here we have the big central lantern of the church, as well as the crowning cupola of the as well as the twin towers of the facade. By this time, the pinnacles as well as the turrets of the towers are no longer present. Next slide, please. So here is another view. This is the Paseo de Magallanes. Somewhere towards our back, by this time the Magellan's monument has been transferred. Uh, we see directly before us where the calesas go to and fro. This is the gate of Santo Domingo, which was damaged by the 1863 earthquake. But to the left, we can see another gate. This is Puerta Isabela II. And this particular gate opens up to another courtyard. So this courtyard is flanked by the one part of the Dominican Convent as well as the buildings of San Juan de Letran. Next slide, please. So this is another view of the convent from the city walls. Here we can clearly see the two-story section, that part of the convent that runs that runs parallel to the buildings of San Juan de Letran and Santa Catalina, as well as the three-story section of the dormitory that connects this two-story structure with the riverside dormitories. There are indications that the vault during the 1940s was built somewhere near the patio, near the inside one of the buildings that borders the patio inside the Dominican enclave. So if you look through this picture, you can see beyond the wall there is a small patio. So this patio opens to some of the Dominican buildings, and this part, I think it's the two-story structure, is where the Procurador General of the Dominicans have their office. Next slide, please. So this is a continuation of the previous, but this one is from the other end. Here we can see the volada that was constructed over the streets, that projects towards above the streets. Santo Domingo Convent is located at the left side of the picture, and the iron rails of the patio can be seen towards the edge of the picture. Next slide, please. So this is a part of the patio this is part of the convent that faces the patio. The third hollow from the left is the doorway to the convent. This is the porteria. So everyone who wished to have something to do with the Dominicans would enter this doorway. And through a series of turns, upon entering this porteria, one is led to the interior courtyard of the Dominican Convent. Next slide, please. So, in contrast to the bahay na boto structure of the previous facades of the convent, the interior patio was designed along Gothic lines. Here we see at the lower section, the Gothic, the pointed arches with traceries, and a more simpler one for the upper cloisters. So the lower cloister is also known as the Claustro de los Processiones. Later on, we will see portions of this claustro with the andas or carrozas. So this is the interior garden. There are more or less 4 patios inside the Dominican Convent. This is one of them. Next slide, please. So we have another view. This one is towards the central, the crowning lantern of the main church. Next one. Next slide, please. And here we have another view of of the inner cloisters, and this view is parallel to the facade of the church. So this part of the facade was the last to be approved. It is simpler compared to the other facade. And here the Gothic elements were retained. Next slide, please. So another view of the connecting three-story dormitory. So we can surmise here that the the or the friars convents are among the tallest structures in Intramuros. Of course, excludes the churches. Next slide. So within the convent is the Dominican Library. So it is this library reputedly holds 18,000 volumes. So most of these publications were printed in the Philippines, although the Dominicans also brought along books from Europe and Mexico. But among the glories of this convent should have been the books printed in the Philippines. However, all of the 18,000 volumes of this library perished in the bombings of 1941. Next slide. So going back to the interior of the church, we can see here the original design Felix Rojas conceived for the interior of the church. Here we have the sanctuary with the fan vaults of the sanctuary, and beneath the sanctuary beneath the vaults of the ceiling is the two-story central retablo. The upper one enshrines the image of Santa Maria Magdalena, the second patroness, in honor of the day the Dominicans arrived in the Philippines in 1587. And the lower portion enshrines the image of Santo Domingo de Guzman. This particular retablo, which looks like a templete, literally a small temple, is quite similar to that of Oton that was destroyed in 1948 earthquake, as well as the one in Naik. Next slide, please. In this particular church, Felix Rojas transferred the weight of the building from the walls to the interior columns. So these particular columns hold the weight of the roof, and hidden beneath the part where where the pointed arch is the main beam of the church. But Felix Rojas used galvanized iron to clad these wooden structures. The architects at that time argued that the galvanized iron prevents inspectors from looking at the woodworks of the church, and this may not be good since deterioration will not be seen early enough. Because of this, all of the all of the original designs for the ceilings were stripped off and this was replaced. So here we can see uh, the 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 walls as they appeared later. Next slide, please. Here we have another view of the vault, and that big pillar that we see towards the left is an indication that this photograph was taken beneath the choir loft. In this particular picture, we can see the main retablo. This retablo was carved by Isabelo Tampinco, as well as the pulpit that we see here. We'll look into this later on. But we go first to the choir loft. Next slide. So this is the portion of the choir loft, and we can see the bronze railings, portions of which appear. So this railing was cast in the foundry of Lastra and San Pedro in Malabon. The communion railings of the sanctuary, or the one that separates the presbytery or sanctuary from the rest of the nave, was also cast in the foundry of Lastra y San Pedro. So here we can see that the chandeliers are covered by cloth. Here we have uh, the central retablo of Santo Domingo. This retablo was the one that was carved by Isabelo Tampinco. This was one of the projects that Tampinco delivered for the Dominicans during that renovation of the church. We know that this particular scene was taken during the feast day of Santo Domingo, because if you look at the central niche, the image of Santo Domingo is flanked by the image of San Francisco de Assis. So this particular scene, wherein the two images are placed by side, commemorates the mystical meeting of the two founders of the Franciscan and the Dominican orders. There used to be a small sculpture in the convent that commemorates this event. This is the Embrasado. We don't know what happened to this particular sculpture. And the image of San Francisco was on normal days. The image of San Francisco is located at the leftmost niche. In this particular occasion, the image of San Pio Quinto is there. So this at the other niche is the image of San Antonino de Florencia, and as usual, above the topmost niche is occupied by Elena. We can also see here along the sanctuary the image of San Vicente Ferrer. So in this particular picture, two images survive the bombings, as well as the tabernacle in the center. So, and we also have portions of the communion rail. Okay. Next slide, please. So, this is the bas-relief in bronze of one of the Dominican saints that are placed along the communion rail. The other one is, next slide, please. So the bust of most likely Santo Domingo de Guzman. So both of these bas-reliefs were salvaged, some say from collectors, according to some accounts, but we have to verify that with USC Museum. And these are on display at the USC Museum. Next slide, please. So this is the more detailed picture of the Sagrario. This particular tabernacle dates from the inauguration of the Gothic Church of Santo Domingo in 1867. This survived the war because in sometime during the early 1900s, a new silver tabernacle was donated to the church. As a result, this particular tabernacle was transferred to the chapel of Our Lady of the Rosary. Next slide, please. Okay, so we'll shift to the continuation. So allow us for a few minutes. So this is the Sagrario again, and we have a view of one of the collateral aisles of Santo Domingo Church. So this is the epistle side. So this is the right-hand side of along the nave, and in this epistle side aisle, we can see two retablos along the wall. One was originally dedicated to the Holy Family, and another one was dedicated to Beata Imelda. However, later on, a separate chapel, a separate retablo was installed inside the Lady Chapel, and the image of the Holy Family was transferred there. This particular retablo inside the Lady Chapel is opposite the retablo of San Vicente Ferrer, also inside the Lady Chapel. So, next slide, please. So, just a few paces from those two retablos, in one of the pillars of Santo Domingo is the pulpit that Tampinco carved for Santo Domingo. So the sound this pulpit in this picture is crowned by a Gothic pinnacle, and the staircase that leads to the pulpit is embellished with bas-relief of Dominican saints. Next slide, please. Rancho, can we go back? Okay. Next slide. We'll move forward. Yeah, okay. So, if you notice towards the right-hand side, the ceiling of this particular portion of Santo Domingo is still decorated in the fan vault style. So this part retained the original ceiling that was conceived for it by Felix Rojas. This part is the entrance to the Lady Chapel, and you can see at the upper part of the entrance, you can see the screens. Because beyond that screen is located the organ that was reserved for the Lady Chapel. So there were two organs in Santo Domingo. The main organ is located in the choir loft that I discussed a few slides before. And in this particular part is another smaller organ. So this was the one that is being used for the masses, Sunday masses for Our Lady. And next slide, please. So we enter the chapel. So at the other end of the chapel is the sanctuary of that holds the retablo of Our Lady of the Rosary. And this particular retablo is decorated by medallions that show scenes from the mysteries of the Rosary. And within the central niche is the image of Our Lady of the Rosary, flanked by two Dominican saints, Santo Domingo to the left and Santa Catalina to the right. And at the lower end, we now have here in this picture the sagrario that was moved from the main altar to this site. So as you can see, this part holds most of the things that survived the war in during the 1941 bombings. Next slide, please. So we have one version of the print that shows the the niche of Our Lady of the Rosary, as it was, and it is flanked by the kneeling statues of Santo Domingo and Santa Catalina. There is another print that shows uh, the reliquaries that are being displayed in this particular niche, but I can't find them, so I wasn't able to include them. Anyway, next slide, please. So here, at the others, adjoining the Lady Chapel is the sacristy of Santo Domingo. As we can see here at the ceiling, the fan vaults were retained. They were not replaced. And from the doorway, we can see portions of the convent. In this particular photograph, we can see the staircase that leads to the upper sections of the cloister. We also see the Great Cross that is now at the UST Museum. So it's at one end of the sacristy. And take note of the big table in the foreground. So that will be our reference point for the next picture. Next slide, please. So here we have that same big table, and this is the end of the sacristy that has the door that leads to the Lady Chapel. Take note that to the left you can see a retablo. It is actually the oratory where the friars say their prayers before they say mass. And according to some accounts, in the central niche of this oratory is the image of Beata Juana de Asa used to be enshrined in this particular oratorio. So next slide, please. So Tampinco carved 4 sets of doors for Santo Domingo. 3 of them are in front, the central portal, as well as the 2 lateral portals. And the 4th one is this lateral door that opens out to the UST Plaza. And if you look closely at the postigo, the postigos are decorated with images of Dominican saints. These are the martyrs of the Dominican martyrs in Asia. So this particular door, the martyrs at this particular door will be represented in the new Santo Domingo in Quezon City by the stained glass window at the left side. So here, the martyrs are represented by bas-relief images along this lateral door. So this is also the doorway through which the processions of Santo Domingo leave the church. And uh, next slide, please. During the Spanish-American War, Santo Domingo served as one of the places where the Spanish prisoners were quartered. Here we can see them in front of the central portal of. So you can see carved in the postigo of the door. According to some accounts, these are allegories representing the virtues that are espoused by the Dominican orders. Next slide, please. So we have another view of the same soldiers. These were the same soldiers that we in the previous picture. Again, they are uh, they are resting in the patio of Santo Domingo. Uh, we know that the troops did not only stay in the open space; they were also quartered inside the convent because we read reports that after the Spanish-American War, the Dominican fathers sent an inventory of the things that were damaged in the convent, as well as the as indemnification for these objects. Next slide, please. So one of the paintings that was damaged during this time was a big picture of Santa Maria Magdalena, which, according to the document, was painted by an accomplished painter. So this big picture is now in UST Museum, and this is attributed to Juan Arceo. Next slide, please. Uh, there are several images of Our Lady of the Rosary in Santo Domingo. A few of them are small, such as this image. This image is called La Hapona. Um, the first accounts of the image dates from the early years. This particular image was used by the confraternity of Our Lady of the Rosary for the processions around the cloisters of the convent. And we also have accounts that this particular image accompanied the galleons. In one occasion, uh, a galleon arrived from Mexico, uh, and two images were uh, were taken in the procession from the galleons to Intramuros. One of them is La Hapona, and the other one is uh, Our Lady of Antipolo. So mass from after the procession, they were brought to Santo Domingo, and a mass was said. Okay, next slide, please. So there were other small images. This one is in the museum a few years ago, and the museum notes says that this is La Japonesa. So basing on the features of this particular ivory image, it most likely dates from the early years. Um, Next slide, please. So the ivory image that we now know as Lanaval is depicted in several prints. This print by, I think this is by Atlas. This print was one of the most famous. It depicts the altar of Our Lady of the Rosary just before the British invaded Manila. Uh, the elements showed Rococo elements. Although we are not sure whether the tableau itself was done in the Rococo style, because uh, the embellishments are too big in proportion to to the retablo. This may have been some of the elements here may have been devices. So this print is important because it gives us an idea of the silver frontal of the Virgin during this time. So we can see here the silver pechero or the frontal. So next slide, please. So the frontal here, you can recognize it here. It's clearly. So this is the pechero. Uh, Both the Virgin and Child had this silver frontal. In addition to the image of Our Lady of the Rosary, uh, San Vicente Ferrer also had a silver pechero. However, these silver frontals were looted by the by the British when they invaded Manila in 1762. So a lot of objects were taken from the convents during this time. It was also during this time that the processional carriage of Lanaval was looted. So according to descriptions, this processional carriage of Our Lady was shaped like a Spanish galleon. If you read the accounts of the Augustinians also lost the Corpus Christi processional carriage. Uh, that particular float or carroza in the Augustinian was in the Gothic style. So it would have only been the only Gothic art object in Manila during that time that we know of. Although a Spanish writer says that San Agustin itself has remnants of Gothic architecture. So next slide, please. Uh, so here we have a picture of the Lanaval Procession. If you notice, this was a day procession. During the early Spanish period, um, the procession of Our Lady of the Rosary was celebrated during the first day of October. This commemorates the Battle of Lepanto. And during that time, the orphans from Santa Potenciana, those who had come of age, the orphan girls, joined the procession, and these orphan girls are known as Sagalas. So this may be the forerunner of the Sagalas that we have right now. During that time, they joined the procession to signal that these orphan girls have sufficient dowry to be married off. So in this particular early morning procession, we have the leading image on its silver andas, San Pio Quinto, and directly at the back is the andas of Santo Domingo de Guzman. Of course, we can see the hangings along. This is the Santa Rosa College. We can see hangings from the balcony of the college. Next slide. So the last of the three images is the andas bearing the image of Our Lady of the Rosary. If you notice, there is a strong sheen coming from the from the frontals of the image, because at this time another frontal had been made, which was from the workshop of Zamora. So this is the frontal that we have right now that is being used on certain occasion. So next slide, please. So if the early morning procession commemorates the Lepanto event, the second Sunday procession, which is conducted during the evening of the second Sunday, is for the Lanaval festivities to honor the miracles of 1645. One of the earliest images that has accounts of joining the Lanaval, in addition to the three images, was San Pedro Martir. So this was, according to the camareras, this was a relatively big image. The head was quite massive, but unfortunately, although it survived the war, um, it is recorded as missing during the years just before 1960s. Next slide, please. So we have here the processional image of San Antonino de Florencia. One account details that the golden vestments that this image wears is quite an expensive vestment. It was second only to the papal regalia of San Pio V. This was also destroyed during the war. So next slide, please. So in the next slide, we will be able to see how this image is placed along the cloisters of Santo Domingo. So this is a view from the cloister. This shows the nickel silver carroza of San Antonino de Florencia, as well as the regalia vestments. And at the back is another andas. The image of the Santa is quite unclear, and it is located to one of the big paintings that used to decorate the lower cloisters. So this is how the processional images are lined up along the cloisters of Santo Domingo just before they are taken out in procession. Next image. Next is okay. So this is the image of Santo Tomas de Aquino. This image was commissioned in 1870, and it disappeared. But before it disappeared, we have accounts that it was enshrined in one of the collateral altars of Santo Domingo. It was also lost during the war. Next slide, please. So here we have an image of the processional image of San Jose. One of the image here survived the war, the other did not. So the child Jesus is the one that is being carried by the image of Santa Ines in contemporary Lanaval processions. Unfortunately, this image of San Jose did not survive the war. So next slide, please. So from this image on, these are the images that survive, that we can still see in the Lanaval processions, most likely except for one. So here we have the image of Santa Ines, as I told you before. This particular image of the child Jesus is no longer with the convent of Santo Domingo, because before the Spanish Dominican fathers left, they asked for this image of the child Jesus that they will carry back wherever they will go. So in its place was the image of the child Jesus from San Jose. Okay, so we can still see this image during October. Next slide. So here we have another image, the image of Santa Rosa de Lima. So except for a few modification in in posture, this is the same image that we see in Santo Domingo. Next slide. So another survivor is the image of Santa Catalina de Ricci. So almost everything except for the vestments in this image is intact, and it can be seen in the Lanaval Procession. Next slide, please. So this is the image of San Vicente Ferrer. Uh, if the details of this particular image were examined, one would notice that there are indications that this is one of the older images in the convent today. There were accounts in 1741 that shows the silver uh, embellishments of this image, one of which was the silver pechero. So most likely this particular image dates from that time. And the silver ornaments that we see in this particular photo dates to 1804, after the British invasion. Next slide, please. So here, as I've told you before, this is the Gila vestment of San Pio Quinto, one of the most expensive golden vestments in the Santo Domingo Convent. Unfortunately, the vestments did not survive the war, but the image still joins the Santo Domingo processions. Next slide, please. So this particular image of Santa Catalina de Sena is being kept by the Dominican sisters at Siena College. So in the chapel, this is enshrined from time to time, and this is brought to Santo Domingo for the Lanaval Procession. Here we can see the image on its grand silver andas, and later this was converted to a carroza. Next slide, please. Sorry for the label. This should be Santo Domingo de Guzman. So here we have an image of Santo Domingo de Guzman. Try comparing the features of the face of this image with the next one. So next slide, please. So here is another angle. So the vestment survives, as well as the silver uh, attributes of the saint, but there might be indication that this image was a different one. It it The head looks up, and based on how the head was configured, um, the base of the neck is rounded, in contrast to to the mannequin images wherein you have a wooden base for the head. So this particular image needs further research, for it may hint of other images that may have survived the war. There are pictures to confirm this, but let's wait for the owner of the picture to give us permission to use the picture before we can say something conclusive about this image. So next image. So this is the kappa of the Lanaval. We can there are accounts that this may be the same cape that was exhibited at the Palacio del Arzobispado in 1882 for the celebration of the anniversary of Santa Teresa. Next slide, please. So these are among the last images, photographs of the Lanaval Procession in Intramuros. We see here the carroza of Santa Rosa de Lima as it is about to enter the plaza of the Manila Cathedral. So notice how dense the people are. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of the Lanaval in 1941 as well as the Silver Carroza. The Silver Carroza was a carro triumphal. It was donated to the church by the matriarch of the Osmeña clan. So it joined the procession of 1941 for the first and last time, because by December it will be bombed inside the cloisters. Next slide, please. So we commonly associate Santo Domingo with the Lanaval Procession, but there is another important procession that originates from Santo Domingo, and this is the Good Friday procession of Santo Domingo. This was so here we see the cereales that opens the procession. So the cereales as well as the high processional cross can still be seen in Santo Domingo, and the processional cross is being used during important occasions. If you go to the Lanaval processional entrance, this is being carried by the brothers on the way to the altar. Next slide, please. So this part of the whole Good Friday procession features the andas of San Juan Evangelista. So this particular image survives, and following the image of San Juan are the Tres Marias. In addition to the images, you can see here various implements of the Passion as well as the crucifixion that are being carried by small boys. One of them is the cross-shaped pole just below the carroza of the Santa, and another one to the right. This holds the tunic, and between these two are, I think this is the hisopo, and as well as the reed. Just look for the children. These are being carried by the children, and according to the accounts of Bowering, these children are walk in spaces between the carrozas, between the andas. Next slide, please. So this is the image of San Juan at present. Next slide, please. So another view of that same procession. This one clearly shows the next three Tres Marias and further pasos. Here we can see the beneath the andas of the first Santa, you can see the ladder. So next slide, please. So the Good Friday procession honors the Santo Entierro. So this is the silver carroza of Santo Entierro in Santo Domingo. So this is quite high. There is a not so clear picture that shows the lower level candles above the heads of the Dominican friars that walk before this particular carroza. So this entire carroza looms above the heads of the people who are joining the procession. So this was also lost during the 1941 bombing. Next slide, please. So at 10 o'clock on Good Friday, another procession leaves the Church of Santo Domingo. This is the image of Our Lady of Solitude. It is a single image. And if you look at this particular picture, you can see that a big dagger pierces the heart of the Virgin. Next slide, please. So the image survives, but not the heart and the dagger. But we're still fortunate to have the image. So as early as 1590, there were accounts of the Franciscans who were in charge of the procession of the Santo Entierro and Our Lady of Solitude. And they also there were also on the accounts that these two processions were given to the Dominicans. In fact, in one of the early maps of Santo Domingo, there is a separate chapel for Our Lady of Solitude, the La Soledad, as it was labeled on the map. So it indicates that this particular confraternity is quite old. But we're not sure if this is the same image. This is not, the features are not consistent to 1590. Next slide, please. So everything was lost when the Japanese bombed the church in December. I think it's 26 or 27, and it hit the area near the lantern. Because of this direct heat, the main beam of the church collapsed, and it brought down the entire roof with it. This may have been the reason why the a lot uh, a lot that can be seen in Santo Domingo failed to survive the war. However, if you look at the left side, it is quite unscathed. So this ends my presentation. Next slide, please. And thank you for joining us in this learning session.
Thank you so much, Prof. June, for that very enlightening presentation. Now, we are going to our Q&A portion of this webinar. Now, I'd like to remind our viewers that if you would like to ask questions, feel free to do so. If you are in Zoom, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Just key in your questions there in the Q&A button. And if you're viewing by Facebook, feel free to raise your questions in the comment section below the live stream video. Now, due to limited time, we can only raise and answer some of the questions, and I will only read aloud questions that have not yet been addressed by the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so our first question is from Zoom. This one is from Brian Ferrer. Uh, were the remains exhumed when the open space on the lateral side of the church facing the old UST was converted into a plaza? Were there detailed accounts of the conversion of the space? I think Brian is referring to the Plaza Santo Tomas.
Yes. Okay, so thank you, Brian, for that question. Unfortunately, we do not have accounts of the conversion of the plaza. We can only surmise about this burial place because there's an old map of UST that shows this particular plaza as being labeled as cementerio. So there were no other accounts for that. We need further research to to verify when the conversion took place. But we know that Narciso Claveria reissued the call for burials to be transferred outside the city. No burials are will be allowed within the city limits. So that's a reiteration, 1849. But uh, this particular decree of the governor was first issued in 1792. Most likely, it was during that time that the conversion of the plaza took place, and based on what uh, what what transpired in other burial places, uh, remains were being exhumed and reinterred in sacred places. This can be seen in Paco, wherein the remains are either thrown in the garbage pit, but if you're wealthy enough, uh, you will be subsequently given space inside the church.
What about, sir, the remains inside the old church in Intramuros? Can we say that the remains are now in the Santo Domingo in Quezon City?
Um, we have accounts of the Lady Chapel because the ones interred inside the Lady Chapels are big names. The Ortigas, the Inchaustis, these were exhumated and they were transferred to the family mausoleo, except for one, which was transferred to another place because the tombstone was damaged.
Thank you, sir. This next question is from Facebook. The procession during the Feast of Lanaval was one of the most awaited events of the year. The pageantry and the pageantry was jewel infested and grand beyond compare. Can we therefore say that the Lanaval had the largest Marian devotion in Old Manila, and that the Lanaval was the quintessential image of the Virgin Mary associated with Intramuros?
Okay. Based on the descriptions, uh, it was the grandest. It was the grandest procession of Marian procession in Intramuros. Uh, they say that if you go to Manila, the fiestas of the neighboring towns, because during that time Santa Cruz, Pandacan, these are towns, are limited to the local people of the place. However, when the Naval celebrations start, everyone gather in Manila for this particular festivity. So the Lanaval draws people not only from Intramuros but also those from the extramuros as well as from the provinces. So that's one one thing that we can gauge. One way that we can gauge of the importance. But of course, we have other images, Marian devotions in Intramuros, and these are equally grand. The La Consolacion, for example, but some of these devotions or processions lost their glitter and pomp after the war. No one remained to continue the processions.
Thank you, sir. This one is from Facebook again. In the present Santo Domingo Church, there is an image of Saint Francis prominently shown in the central stained glass at the main altar. Did the original Santo Domingo Church in Intramuros also have a special place for Saint Francis, and why the special treatment for a non-Dominican saint?
Okay, so we're not sure. We have no descriptions of the previous churches. But when Isabelo Tampinco carved the multi-niche retablo, the left niche was allocated to San Francisco. And San Francisco was the founder for the Franciscan. Santo Domingo was the founder for the Dominicans. And there is a semi-legendary account that these two people who live in two different places met each other in a mystical encounter. And this mystical encounter is called the Abrasado. And that's why during the feast day of Santo Domingo, the image of San Francisco is transferred to the main niche together with the image of Santo Domingo.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for that answer. The Tiples de Santo Domingo is one of the earliest choral groups in the Philippines, and the song Despedida a la Virgen is deeply associated with them. Is there any indication that the members of the group were historically castrated, like what was common in Europe before?
We can only gather accounts but because of the sensitive nature of the matter, usually these are left unsaid. So we have to dig further for other sources to determine whether something like that occurred. But if we look at the children right now, they retain the voices without undergoing such a process. If we go to the Lanaval festivities, we can hear the voices of these little boys, and I think they did not undergo the process, and they're high. Thank you for that.
Next question po. In the early 20th century, there was this friendly competition for the title of Patroness of the Philippines. The Dominicans advocated for the Lanaval, while the Jesuits pushed for the Immaculate Conception. Eventually, the Immaculate Conception was adopted as patroness of the entire country. Do you have any comments on this, sir?
Okay, so the Immaculate Conception became a dogma in 1854, and it gained prominence because the image in Antipolo was commonly referred to as the Immaculada because it does not carry a child. It is presumed that Jesus exists in the image as an unborn child. Yes, there are accounts, and maybe it's better to read the essay of Dr. Castro in the book Lanaval. It expounds on this issue quite well.
And I think even the Aglipayans advocated their own, no? The Buen Viaje.
Yeah, yes. Because of the color of the image.
The color of the skin of the image.
But they also have their own virgin, the one clad in balintawak.
Thank you, sir, for that question. This one is from Joseph Cabrias. Good afternoon. May I know if the Dominicans had made an inventory of their precious icons before and after the war? If so, do we have an idea on the percentage that survived?
Thank you, Joseph, for that question. During the Spanish period, there are inventories. Most likely before the war, there was an inventory. However, we do not. I wasn't able to check the inventory just before the war because the only clue that we can have is a summation of the value of the of the objects at that time. And it says further that if you want to look at the details, you can check the main inventory of the convent. So at least an inventory exists before the war.
And I think they made an inventory after the war so that they can claim damages, no?
Yes, there. Father Pablo Fernandez hints of this inventory about wartime damages.
And were they properly compensated?
You cannot. There's no value for cultural objects. So they only value the cultural objects at that time based on the worth of the materials.
Thank you, sir. This one is from John Michael Marasigan. So he's asking about the design of the last version of the Santo Domingo before the war. So he's asking if it was Gothic or neo-Gothic and what is the difference? So basic history of architecture, sir.
Okay, so thank you, John Michael, for that question. So the 1867 Santo Domingo was designed under the neo-Gothic style. So in Gothic architecture, they follow certain convention. So there are elements. It should be made of stone. It has flying buttresses. It has stained glass. Instead of during the latter course of the period, entire walls were stripped of stones, and these were replaced by stained glass windows. The weight of the entire structure is being carried by the flying buttresses. However, when everything was revived during the late 19th century, it was called neo-Gothic. It does not embody the spirit of Gothic times because during the Gothic times, Gothic structures are their lofty height is supposed to reflect the spirituality of the people. However, in 19th century, it is just an adaptation of the style. One main difference is the change in materials. If you look at the materials in the 19th century, you can use other materials besides stone. In the Philippines, you use stones and in combination with bricks. You no longer have the flying buttresses, which characterize Gothic structures. The walls are quite low, and the buildings were more horizontal during neo-Gothic rather than vertical. So those are the main things. Elements were just copied from Gothic. The spirit is no longer there. It's a different spirit that's working in 19th century, which is the revival of previous styles. That's why neoclassic, neo-Gothic are also called revivalist styles. I hope that answers John Michael's question.
Thank you, sir. This one is from JP Abriera. Are there, this is with regard to the British looting in 1762. Are the Dominican treasures still with the British? Is there a way for the Filipino Dominicans or the Philippine government to ask back what was looted by the British during their occupation of Manila?
There are some people say that there are some things in the British Museum that are related to the Philippines, but the things that were looted from the Philippines that that belongs to the ransom of Manila are mostly precious metals, and during that time they do not value metals for their cultural value. They value metals for their intrinsic value as silver. So most of these were melted down to be used for other things. With copper and bronze. The only thing that saved the bells of Santo Domingo and Binondo from being melted down was that they ransomed back these bells. Otherwise, the metals were being melted. So it's hard to verify if anything still survived.
Thank you, sir. This one is from Brother Felix Javier. There was a tradition recorded in Father Horacio de la Costa's book, Light Cavalry, that said that a Jesuit priest would celebrate the Mass in Santo Domingo for the feast of Santo Domingo de Guzman, and a Dominican priest in turn in San Ignacio for the feast of San Ignacio. Would you know when this tradition started, and if
Uh,
the tradition is still being practiced?
okay. What I know is is that the Augustinians celebrated Mass in the Church of San Ignacio during the Feast of San Ignacio, and the Jesuits celebrated Mass in the Church of the Augustinians during the Feast of Saint Augustine. This is because the Augustinians hosted the first batch of Jesuits in the Philippines. What was being alternately celebrated between the Augustinians and Dominicans is the Feast of Corpus Christi. During the first, every 4 years, the Christi is celebrated between these two churches. The first one is in the Augustinian Church, and the Dominicans go there. And after 4 years, it was the turn of the Augustinians to go to the Dominican Church. I think it's more of the Corpus Christi celebration rather than the feast days of their respective patrons. Because the feast day of their respective patrons, the Augustinians celebrate it with the Jesuits.
Some people would say that there is this rivalry between the two orders. What can you say about this? So, is there really a rivalry between the Dominicans and the Jesuits?
Uh, if you situate it in history, the rivalry might have stemmed from the first colleges in Manila, the first educational institutions in Manila, because the first institution that was founded in Manila was the San Ignacio, 1595, and later on in 1611 was the Colegio del Santo Rosario, which eventually became the UST. And San Ignacio uh, was given a title of university, and later the UST was given the same title. And because of the limited number of people during that time, you have a cathedra or a post for the professors. And due to the limited number of people, you only have a limited number of posts. So there was a sort of rivalry between these two. One order would say that I think one cathedra is enough for the city, while the other would say we also need the cathedra for our constituents. Maybe that stems from that.
And I think Father Villaruel, in one of his books, even stated that Miguel de Benavides, who was the founder of UST, the Archbishop, even went so far as to actually oppose the establishment of the Colegio of the Jesuits. Is that so?
Miguel, I haven't encountered that particular account. Sorry for that.
Thank you, sir. Our next question is from Facebook. Several people today, especially among the youth, are advocating for the reconstruction of the Santo Domingo Church. Would you feel like you also would you also advocate the same for the reconstruction of the church?
Uh, there are two sides with regards to heritage. One is if it's no longer there, if there are no longer any remains, then it's better to move on. So the other one is right after the destruction, they tend to rebuild what was there. So this is what happened in Warsaw. That's why Warsaw was reconstructed according to how the city looked like before the war. But in the case of the Philippines, so much has been uh, it's been too long since the last one was destroyed. And if you're going to reconstruct it, what how would you reconstruct it? Would you reconstruct it as the shrine of Our Lady of the Rosary? Then what will you do with the present shrine that we have? And would it be able to cater to the number of devotees in the same way that the present shrine, which is big enough, hold the multitudes uh, that attend the festivities? So there are many things to consider, but of course, if you can recreate this, let's start with San Ignacio first, and we can see how everything will go.
Thank you, sir. Uh, this one is from John. I hope I pronounced your name right. John Barakel. After World War II, instead of rebuilding the Santo Domingo Church, why did they build it in Quezon City? Why not just use the existing lot and make use of what they already have? Why not? Why do they have to transfer?
Okay, I think one of the reasons was that uh, you no longer have the people to whom you could cater. So an institution is supposed to cater to the people around it. If you go back to San Agustin, if you go back to Intramuros, most of the people in that part of Manila perished. To whom will you say mass? That's one. So with the money that they have, they transferred to a more promising place. At that time, 1948, uh, Quezon City became the capital of the Philippines. So that place has great prospects, and it was along that area that they rebuilt their shrine. Likewise, the Dominican sisters followed that. So if you go to these two former Dominican institutions in Intramuros, you will see that they follow the same line. So the convent of the sisters is in one of the high areas along Del Monte.
Thank you, sir. For those who wish to pursue this topic po, what sources, secondary and primary, would you recommend po?
So there you have the Lanaval book that was published uh, for the for the for the centenary of the for the 400 years of uh, the commemorative book on that was published on 2007. Uh, Most of the interesting books are written in Spanish. So Dominicos in Extremo Oriente, the the Historia de los Dominicos by Fernandez. Of course, Duarte already has an English translation. You could read the English translation at Blair and Robertson of Duarte's original Historia de los Dominicos. And you have Conception also by the Dominicans. So most of these were written in Spanish. Um, but I think a lot of books are being written about Santo Domingo lately, and these are in English. So try the books by Professor Victor, ano nga ba yung Sir Vic. I think that those are some of the more interesting books that we have. Unfortunately, some of these books being Filipiniana items are out of print. You can just consult them in libraries.
Thank you, sir. And this one is from Jennifer Biaco. How can we encourage our youth to sustain their interest in history, religion, and rituals? And for topics like this one. Thank you.
Okay, so to sustain the rituals, you need to participate. So the key is participation. Uh, the rituals will not prosper if no one is attending to the rituals themselves. I think um, conferences on certain topics, such as the ones that are being organized by Intramuros administration, helps to keep the memory of Intramuros alive. And this is one way by which these kinds of history can be perpetuated for the future generations. And I think we also need to translate some of the classic works in Spanish, because uh, it is only through these translations that we can learn to know what happened in the past. So that's
Thank you, sir. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. Actually, we are over time. We are already almost 2 hours in this webinar. So I'm afraid we're going to have to close the Q&A. But for those who are genuinely interested in the topic, and I see that there are a lot of people who are interested. In fact, there are more than 60 questions pending. So we cannot answer all, of course. So for those who would like to ask further questions, feel free to contact our speaker via his email, rgalang@feu.edu.ph. So if you have any questions, if you want to proceed with the topic and do your own research, if you want to know more because you are a devotee of the Virgin, feel free. Feel free to email Professor Romeo Galang. And before we end this episode, I'd like to promote our social media channels. The Intramuros administration is available in Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. So make sure to follow us in our social media channels because we are going to post updates on future webinars. So this is our 26th episode of the Intramuros Learning Sessions. We've started in April and we've been doing this for every week since then, and this is now our 26th. And please expect more webinars this coming month. So a lot are lined up, and stay tuned. Subscribe to our social media channels to get updated. And for those who are late in this episode, or for those who missed this episode, don't worry because we are going to upload this session later in our YouTube channel. So you can search for the Intramuros Administration in YouTube, or you can go to this link, bit.ly/IAILS. IAILS is all caps. So feel free to visit our YouTube channel and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And I'd also like to promote our page in Google Arts and Culture. So for those who are into history of art, history of religious images, or for those who are just simply interested in viewing our museum items, you can key in Intramuros Administration in Google Arts and Culture. We have digitized many of our museum collections, and if you missed going to our museums, specifically our Museo de Intramuros, feel free to go to our Google Arts and Culture page to view our collections. So our ivory collection and wood Santos collection are displayed in the Google Arts and Culture website. So feel free to visit us. And finally, we are glad to announce that Intramuros has been nominated again this year as Asia's leading tourist attraction for 2020. So Intramuros has been nominated again. Actually, we've been nominated since 2012, and every year we have been nominated. And in 2016, we got the title of of Asia's leading tourist attraction. So help us get the title again this year, this 2020. There are 11 nominees this year for Asia's leading tourist attraction. So among them, we have the Angkor Wat, we have the Borobudur, the Great Wall of China, the Taj Mahal, the Terracotta Warriors of China, the Forbidden City, Victoria Peak in Hong Kong, and the Tokyo Imperial Palace in Japan. And in this prestigious list of nominees, we have Intramuros. So again, we are nominated for Asia's leading tourist attraction. So how can you help in the vote? So how can you vote? So simply create an account, register at worldtravelawards.com, create an account there, verify your email, then just go to the category Asia's leading tourist attraction and go for Intramuros. Vote for Intramuros. Intramuros. So there are 11, but go to Intramuros. And then Intramuros is not the only nominee for this year in the World Travel Awards. So the Philippines also had, the Philippines have 4 other nominations. So we have been nominated this year as Asia's leading tourist board for the Department of Tourism, Asia's leading dive destination, Asia's leading beach destination, and Asia's leading wedding destination. So for Cebu, congratulations Cebu, you've been nominated as Asia's leading wedding destination. So in your account in worldtravelawards.com, please feel free to vote for Intramuros and for the Philippines in our other nominations. Okay, so before we finally end this webinar, Prof. June, would you like to say any final words?
Okay, so I would like to thank everyone who attended this webinar. I hope I was able to share with you some information that would help you in the appreciation of our history as well as in your understanding of the Lanaval history. If you have questions, as Rancho Arcila said before, you can email me or you can communicate with John, and he's constantly in contact with me. Thank you very much for it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, dear speaker, and thank you to everyone who viewed our episode today. And until next time, good day po.